Anyway, indeed, it's a very good speech, very interesting speech as well. For me, I'm a student of sociology, and one of the things that I learned is that society, we evolve from time to time. And how do you want to know our phase of evolutions? Usually it is symbolized by the laws that we have. And the way Prof. Shad Faruqi presented, he started with the principles of our constitution, clear foundation of principles of religious freedom. But we also could realize later how this process of slow evolutions begins with small or a bit by bit of limitations being introduced to our system. And towards our more recent time, more laws, more execution, things like this happen. To some point, we could already sense that there is more limitations than the freedom that we have, maybe. Okay, I would like to open the floor for some questions. Please head to the mic for your questions, which I do welcome in any matters which you think it is important to point out, or even if there is something which you notice that from the presentation slide which you want Prof. Shad Faruqi to explain more. Please do.
Thank you very much for allowing me to ask the first question. Well, Shad, I never met you in person yet, so thank you very much for that exciting talk. When I talk to many of my friends about such issues what we are facing now, they would always use this term, you know, the good old days, and you had ended it that. And I would like to see whether the statement that you made, the last statement, of going back to the spirit of the constitution of our forefathers. And in one sense, I agree with you. However, I always remind many of my friends and say that as a Muslim, I don't want to go back to the spirit of Islam during that time. You see, my father was a police constable, and he was part of the, whatever you call it, Piramli generation or the Malays of that time. And I have nothing against Piramli. I love his films and all that. But, you know, the Tunku and all the Malays at that time were mostly what I call cultural Muslim. By that, I mean, you just pray once in a while. What they say, yeah, you can drink, but you can also pray. That sort of culture, okay? So if you and many of my colleagues were to say that, then that provides a great difficulty, because you are trying to say that the Islam that has been diluted by this kind of Western manner, you know, drinking and all that, is something that produced the constitution, and therefore to have it back. My position is simply that when Abim and all this Islamization came forth, it was a good thing. But there was a problem with the education and or the framework of education in terms of a multiracial democratic nation. And I think we have to look at that. Saying, going back, maybe I misunderstood what you said, but friends, they understand that the past was much better, but that is something which we cannot accept in relation to the idea of Islam as a cultural product. Thank you.
First of all, I would like to thank you, Prof, for the enlightening lectures. You made it clear on very many important points. However, there are two clauses that I think, for me, very problematic, that I need your clarification. First of all, the Article 11, if I'm not mistaken, Article 11, Clause 3, which says that every religion have the right to manage its own affairs. I think, the problem with this that I need to clarify. Of course, it's like we are giving the religion, for example, Islam, the right to manage its own affairs. So this has been one of the arguments by those who supported Hudud, that says this is our affairs, let us manage our own affairs by our discretion, and other religions and other believers or non-Muslim cannot interfere with our own affairs. Even if Muslim didn't agree with this kind of, with the religious administrators' decision to manage its own affairs, we cannot, for example, we don't have the power to give different interpretation. How do we deal with this? Second of all, Article 11, Clause 5, that says all religious freedom are subject to public order, public health, and morality. I wonder what kind of morality, what kind of public morality that religious freedom are subjected to. Thank you very much.
Hi, Prof. Thank you very much for your lecture. I have two major questions. The first one is, so looking at Singapore, I think it is easier for Singapore to have a law that is quite natural or almost natural, neutral to any religion and faith, because once they frame that the founder of Singapore is a colonial, and they in terms of constructing the law, they don't really bring the baggage from the past. They do acknowledge that they have certain history, but when they construct the law and when they basically rule, the law is neutral, and this it's more it gives more ability for the law to adapt and to evolve in accordance to the newer problems and issues happening in the society. Unlike in Malaysia, of which we are very conscious about our history, and the most problematic about this is that we embedded all these baggages of history in our federal constitution, which makes it hard for us to, not only in federal constitution, but we try to expand it, and we make it very, very descriptive in the and more finite when it goes into the state level of enactments. And I think I just want you to comment on this. Our too much consciousness on history, asking everybody to remember our social contract. This is it brings us nowhere, and I think this is such a loss for Malaysia to grow. My second question is in regards to it's just very confusing to me. For instance, in Henayo v. Camaro case right now, Camaro is using the enactment of untuk orang bukan Islam yang under the wait, sorry, I'm just gonna cite the enactment 1 tahun 1988, enactment agama bukan Islam, kawalan pengembangan di kalangan orang Islam 1988. So when I read this enactment, it gives extensive power to the Sharia and all the Jais and all this Islamic institution to the extent of, if say a Christian, say I'm a Muslim and I want to go to court to say that Bible is haram, I can do that easily under this enactment, because it's well interpreted. It's just you can argue much. It's very like it even say that seseorang melakukan kesalahan jika menghantar dan menyebarkan apa-apa terbitan atau bahan iklan mengenai apa-apa agama bukan Islam yang tidak diminta oleh penerima itu, and other clauses, provisions as well in this enactment. So I think what I'm very worried is that a part of federal constitution, we don't have a strong law that protects the minorities, a part of Islam, including I'm not very sure, but we rarely talk about the Sabah and Sarawak religion animistic and paganism and all that. So I hope you can comment on this, like what the future generation can really do around this matter, and perhaps draw some examples from other countries.
Thank you. Prof, when I was talking of the good old days, I wasn't talking about drinking and gambling. I don't even drink coffee, Prof. I'm a tea man. I was talking the good old days about tolerance. And I think that is difficult to deny. People of the early generation do say with considerable pain, they say, we used to go to each other's house, or Raya, Chinese New Year, Deepavali, there was not much of a problem. we used to call our friends mother, auntie, and she would cook for us, that kind of thing. That's what I was talking about. If someone wants to become more strict, instead of saying just one prayer, say all 5 prayers, and on top of it say tahajjud after o'clock at night, yeah, that's not a problem at all. I agree with you, institutions like ABIM and all that tried to promote Islam. I myself contemplated at one time helping ABIM. But even if Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his close Sahaba were to be with us today, I'm sure they would accommodate the other communities. I mean, Prophet Muhammad's Medina tradition, it's incredible. When he migrated to Medina, the Medina Charter was drafted. So I don't think there's any difference between you and me. I didn't mean by reviving the old to say we should be indulging in un-Islamic practices. Even in the olden days, my father-in-law, for example, is a Malay. He's passed away. He was a very religious man. He's old-timer Malay, but at the same time, there was this tremendous open-heartedness. So that's what I was talking about. I don't think there's anything different between you and me. I'm not trying to revive gambling, drinking, and none of that now. But I think respect for diversity. And while I may disagree with you, I don't have to put you down, don't have to insult you. We don't have to criminalize everything. So that's what I meant. Now, the other issue about every religion has the right to manage its own affairs. Yes, indeed. Not only Islam, others have the right to manage their own affairs. But don't forget, Article 11, Clause 3 is subject to Article 11, Clause 4. You can't indulge in violation of public order or public morality. And if your conduct of your religious institutions is against public order, the state has the right to regulate. State has the right to regulate whether it is Islamic religion or whether it is a non-Islamic religion. Then your point about others cannot interfere. Yeah, that's a famous argument here. Non-Muslims should not comment on the hudud law because it's none of your business, it's our own business. Well, non-Muslims have a right to comment on anything if it would affect them. Now, it is not entirely true to say that RUU 355 will not affect the non-Muslims. If you have RUU 355, there will be, and with that, the enactments in Kelantan and Terengganu and possibly other states follow the same laws. Islamic law of evidence may apply. I have received this objection. Let me share it with you. One non-Muslim friend asked me this. He says, if let us say, a non-Muslim woman has been raped, and the matter now goes to the Sharia courts, first of all, her evidence may not carry the weight, because there are, in Islamic law of evidence, there are some rules. First of all, about non-Muslim evidence. Secondly, about female evidence, number of witnesses required. So he says, in which case this non-Muslim woman who has been raped, the rapist may well go scot-free, because the Sharia rules of evidence are different from the rules of the law of evidence. I don't want to use the word good or bad, more flexible or less flexible. I just say different. Yes, I think if Sharia courts are going to have an expanding jurisdiction like the way they have today, it is a fact that in disputes between Muslims and non-Muslims, the matter may end up in the Sharia courts and the non-Muslims may not receive justice. To say doesn't affect you, please ask Indira Gandhi if it doesn't affect her. Please ask Subhashini if Sharia court's decision don't affect her. Come on. There are at least about 50 cases on record where there has been unilateral conversion of children to the religion, matter decided by the Sharia court. In all fairness, some Sharia courts have given custody to the non-Muslim mother. There have been some cases. But in general, the non-Muslim has given not fair treatment. So it's not fair to say, you keep quiet about it, it doesn't affect you. You know, to be truly objective, one must be subjective from the other person's point of view. Last night, beautifully it was stated, you must put your heart in the place of somebody else's heart. You must step into his or her shoes. You must feel his pain. Please. Indira Gandhi's child was taken away from her in 2009. This is 2017. She has not seen her child. Please tell me, on what basis of religion, constitution, can you justify this atrocity that a mother can't see her child for the last 8 years? Please don't bring such disgrace to Islam if Islam is abused like this. So please don't say it doesn't affect them. It does. No? At least they have a right to comment. They don't have the right to make the decision or to pass the law. But to say that it doesn't affect, you know what really at stake is? We are lacking in confidence to be able to give a rational answer. So because we don't want to give a rational answer, we don't have a rational answer sometimes. We are telling people, keep quiet, don't talk. And then you say, it's not, others should not interfere. We have a right to manage our own affairs. What do you mean by own? What do you mean by own? Does own mean only me, or does it mean others of the Muslim community? You're not even allowing other Muslims to comment on these issues. You are trying your best. There have been so many cases. Khalid Samad went to Syria, I think. He went to Syria, came back, and he gave a talk at a surah or a masjid talking about what's happening in Syria. And because he doesn't have a tawliya, he's being arrested and he's being charged. He may end up losing his seat in parliament if he's convicted of more than 1 year. Fatul Bari in Negri Sembilan, he gave a talk somewhere. And because he doesn't have a tawliya, he's being prosecuted. Now, I'm deeply troubled by this as a student of constitutional law. I have free speech, except on grounds of public order, security, incitement to an offense, friendly relation with other states, contempt of court, contempt of parliament, defamation, morality. These are the grounds on which my free speech is subject to restrictions. If respectfully I go to your house and I give a talk about Islam, in what way am I violating public order, national security, incitement to an offense? Why should there be a law? I think this law is unconstitutional. I think this law goes too far. This law arms the Sharia authorities with a bazooka in totally unnecessary situations. So that's my answer to your, we should be allowed to regulate our own affairs, no one should interfere. The final question that you asked was about what is public morality. I can't really answer that. There is no, public morality is not like a point in the sky to which an astronomer can say so far away, and it is no. Public morality will obviously change from time to time. It will change from society to society. And I have to confess to you, in every society, public morality is sadly determined by reference to the morality of the bulk of the population. I mean, in America, there are nudist clubs. So there is a small group of people who believe that nudity is good. But I'm afraid if you walk down Madison Avenue nude, I'm afraid you're going to be picked up. You cannot say, hey, your morality is yours and mine is mine. No, I'm afraid that's the way it works in legal systems. There has to be a norm. Whose norm? And sadly, democracies worship majorities. So I can't really answer that question. All that I will say is this. There should be some free discussion about what is the public morality of the time. And this discussion must take note not only of religious standards, but also possibly of the consequentialist features of a particular rule, the economic aspects of a particular rule. In other words, a holistic approach. So I just give you an example very quickly. Suppose you want to have a very tough stand against abortion. No, it's not allowed by the religion. In some religions, it's not allowed. My understanding of Islam is that abortion would be allowed till the day the ruh enters the body. Then there are restrictions, though in some countries there is a fair amount of flexibility. Okay, but in some religions it's very strict. The moment there is conception, that's it, there is a child. Now I want to ask, what happens if the woman has been raped? What if there is incest? What if that would kill the mother? Or the child is severely deformed? Are you going to insist? So I think our approach must be holistic. It cannot just be relying on one criterion. Okay, then the issue of Singapore. I was talking of only one aspect of Singapore. Singapore is quite strict on hate speech. I like that. I don't think hate speech should be part of free speech. As I said earlier, freedom per se has no value. I may think my religion is the best. I have no right to go around proselytizing others by telling them, you are living in the dark, let me show you the light. I have no right to do that. I have no right to do that. So I think that's what I like about the Singapore law. And many other countries have such laws. Europe has a good law, but there is a lot of hypocrisy in Europe at the European Court of Justice on the issue of hate speech. Some types of hate speech is allowed and other types of hate speech is not allowed. But I like the fact, I think in a civilized society, people should have mutual respect for each other. I have no right to come to your house and say, I think your children are very stupid, my children are very bright. No, my children may be very bright, but I have no right. And truth is no justification when it comes to issues of hate speech. Truth is not a justification. I have no right to insult your parents, I have no right to insult your culture, I have no right to insult your religion. And there's no question of saying, but it's true. In matters of hate speech, I think truth is not a justification. So I was talking only of Singapore's law on hate speech. About your statement about consciousness of history, Singapore is not conscious of history. We are very conscious of history. Well, I think nothing is irrelevant. Everything is relevant and nothing is irrelevant. Our approach should be holistic. History cannot be the sole criterion for interpreting law, because sometimes the law deliberately seeks to depart from history. For example, the Indian Constitution, Article 15 says, untouchability is hereby abolished, full stop. Now, what about history? Well, just sorry. What about history? The law says untouchability is hereby abolished. In 1924, sati was abolished. Sorry, whatever history may say. So, nevertheless, history is important, but religion is important. I'm not prepared to say religion is not important. Economics are important. Sociology is important. Nothing is irrelevant. I think we should have a holistic approach. The final one is, this one I didn't fully understand what Kamarul is trying to do. I don't take seriously much of what Kamarul says or does on this issue. But if your statement, I don't know if I heard you correct. If someone were to say Bible is haram, I think you will be caught by Article 11, Clause 4, public order. I think you will be caught by Section 298 of the Penal Code, insulting other religions. No one has a right to say that. No one has a right to insult other religions like that, because this is a game two can play. You say your religious book is haram, someone will say, hello, your religious book is also haram. So I don't think we should play this game. The Constitution is quite clear. Your freedom of religion, any freedom of religion, is subject to public order. And if you go around insulting other religions by by insulting the religious books. I hope that the prosecution under Section 298, wounding religious feelings, will be initiated against you. So I don't think anyone should do these things. I'm not saying that you are suggesting, but you're saying some people are arguing like that. Well, they should not argue like that. I don't know if I fully answered the question.
Hi, my name is Nahid. Thank you, Prof, for the talk. I have questions about the issues of freedom of religion within the Islam itself. In this country, it can be said that somehow the state has an active role in dispersing a certain version of Islam. For example, the teachings of religious schools, publishing materials, and I think, if I'm correct, somehow the appointments of Imam itself has to be subject to approval by religious institution. So my question is, given the fact that if we were to have a diverse version of Islam, what would be your vision on managing this diversity of Islam that can be applied in this country? Thank you.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Umar Mukhtar. Thank you for the great speech. My issue is with regard to your critique to what you call Hadith bill. You criticize that the bill should be open to be criticized also by the non-Muslims, and you did mention that how it affects directly to their affair. But unfortunately, on what I heard from your explanation, you give the example from the civil matters in the Sharia court. When you said, you mentioned about the Subashini and also the Indira Gandhi case, but the matters that we explained or proposed by the 355 bill was regarding to the criminal offences. So the examples given was not satisfactory enough to say that the non-Muslim should take part in criticize the bill. And second thing, when I appreciate when you say that the tawliyah or the accreditation to teach a religion is so overpowerful or overwhelming that even to say about a Syrian is problematic. I agree with that, and I think this is not to abolish the accreditation itself, but this is my proposal actually, to submit the board of who handle the accreditation process, or the board who giving tawliyah should be subject to the administrative law itself, because from my perspective that many states conduct their accreditation process in such a biased manner, because they relate to the individual, whether you support this individual, for example Zamihan, and also if you not support this even these people or personal capacity action, and then you are not given tawliyah. I think how we resolve the issue of tawliyah is by submit the accreditation process to the administrative law itself. So that is my question. Thank you.
My name is Ihsan. I have only one question. So from your presentation, I can conclude that you agree that hate speech should be applicable and free speech is limited. However, I want you to clarify more on what is the threshold in order to ban preachers like that have the potential to inspire people to commit the act of terrorism, extremism, so on and so forth. For example, we have Zakir Naik, other Hizb ut-Tahrir preachers. So can you explain to us what is the practical threshold in order to ban these people under the precept of hate speech? Thank you.
The question of freedom of religion within Islam, I fully agree with you that the state has a vigorous role, from the appointment of the imam to the framing of the drafting of the khutbah, issuing of fatwas now and then. Yes, the state is very strongly involved, and only an official version of Islam is permitted. Now, this is actually an area where we need to have a totally separate session. I personally think diversity is part of the Islamic tradition. Rich diversity is there, and we should allow it to manifest itself instead of threatening people constantly. People who speak about Islam, write about Islam, are issued summons. Dr. Faruqi is one of them. Summons are issued asking them to appear, to explain, and there's always that danger that you may be charged with insulting Islam. I think diversity of thought should be allowed. This overemphasis on taqleed, the gates of ijtihad are closed. I don't think this is right. In my very superficial understanding of Muslim history, I think the Islamic civilization contributed a great deal to world culture, to knowledge, to science, to mathematics. While the gates of ijtihad were open, it is when the gates of ijtihad were closed that Islamic civilization declined. I think we need to allow diversity of thought. I'm not saying that I should be allowed to issue a fatwa, I should be allowed to adjudicate, that is, make a decision. What I'm saying is respectfully submit your views. Outlets should be available to us to express our views. For example, on beating of women, Surah An-Nisa 34, there are lots of interpretations. But I have read an interpretation which says that the words in the Surah An-Nisa, ayat 34, can mean beat. It can mean to strike, to condemn, to separate, to go away from them. To go away from them. Well, if that is so, what's wrong with me humbly submitting to the religious board that actually this is an alternative interpretation of Islam? Could you kindly consider it? Now, it is up to them to say, no, your interpretation is wrong. All in all, that's our decision. But what's wrong? For example, apostasy. I've done some study of this. In the Holy Quran, my understanding is it's a sin. It's not a crime. I know that there are at least 2 hadiths about counseling them, advising them. If they do not desist, then killing them. But at the same time, there is the Sunnah. There is the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. Prophet Muhammad signed the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. It's on record. He signed the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, permitting Muslims who had converted out of Islam to live in peace. And by the way, a few years ago, the Grand Mufti of Al-Azhar was in Kuala Lumpur. He himself said that the rule against apostasy applies only against the belligerent apostate, the one who declares war on you, who indulges in fitna, not the one who leaves you alone, who goes away in peace. So I would like to humbly submit, well, can you kindly consider this interpretation? On the cutting of hands, the Iqta'a, Surah 5, Al-Ma'idah. Here again, there are interpretations that are available. The word translated as cut in 5, ayat 38, Iqta'a occurs 14 other times. And actually, many interpretations. There are people who have written articles to say that it can mean cut or sever. It can also mean disable, cutting off relationship, ending, disabling. Only, I think, 10 out of 57 countries enforce this law. 10 out of 57 Muslim countries. And I would humbly submit to the Muslim scholars, say, this is what I came across in Islamic literature. Could you kindly consider this? So that's my basic view, that I think there should be diversity of thought permitted. Secondly, many of our Sharia officials need better education. Many years ago in the 80s, Islamic University under a faculty of law under Tansri Ahmad Ibrahim started this diploma in Sharia law, and things improved a lot. But I think our Sharia officials need to be better trained. Just like in the legal profession, you have to have certain number of qualification. To be a judge, you must be minimum 10 years in the judicial legal service or in the legal profession. I think we need to improve the professionalism of our Sharia officers. I think they should study not only Shafi'i law, they should study the other mazhabs also. So I have no simple solutions here. I think ultimately this overall idea that is very prevalent in Malay society, that only the religious experts can talk about Islam, I think this is thought that I find totally objectionable. I think we should all be allowed to think about Islam, to speak about it, but of course not to make decisions, not to adjudicate. Then there was the issue of RU 355. You're right that the example of Indira Gandhi and others is a civil example. But I did give the example to you from criminal law of a non-Muslim woman who had been, and let us say the rape, and the matter goes to the Sharia court, and the matter then is to Sharia court. And by the way, in the Kelantan and Terengganu enactments, these crimes are crimes to be tried under the Sharia enactment, because overall approach now of the state assemblies is anything to do with Islam is in the hands of the state assemblies, despite what the Perlembagaan says, that any crime that is in federal hands cannot be tried by the Sharia courts. Schedule 9, List 2, Paragraph 1 is very clear. The Sharia courts have a number of limitations. Number 1, they can try only Muslims. Number 2, they can try crimes only if they are not in the federal list or covered by federal law. Thirdly, the punishment they can impose should be punishment only imposed by federal law. The jurisdiction must be conferred by federal law. Every state assembly is violating this injunction of the Constitution. So I don't think you are entirely right, though I take your point that my example of Indira Gandhi was civil. I did give example from criminal law. In any case, questions of constitutionality, I think everyone should be allowed to comment on questions of unconstitutionality. I think we should not have double standards. You and I constantly criticize Israel, we constantly criticize the USA, we criticize Myanmar, we criticize others. Well then, others should also be allowed to criticize us. Now, you tried to give a very strong defense of the Tauliya. Basically, what you are saying is this, and my experience doesn't agree with your enumeration. You are saying, oh, your process of accreditation is actually very, very fair, very, very noble. Basically, you look into the qualification of the person. That's not what my experience. I have received telephone calls from Muslims who had a Tauliya, who went out and made some criticism of the Karajaan or some criticism of the Sharia authority. Immediately the Tauliya was withdrawn. And they, what are my rights? Can you help me? I say, the way the law stands today, actually the civil courts cannot help you much. The civil courts will say, this is a Sharia matter. So it's not true that the grant of Tauliya and the withdrawal of Tauliya is done in an impartial and very academic or intellectual matter. No, sir. That's not the ground reality. Basically, accreditation is censorship. It's prior restraint. Before I talk to you for permission. Now, to me, that's objectionable. I think the proper approach should be this. If I talk and I say something wrong, punish me. Prosecute me. Prosecute me for insulting Islam. Prosecute me under section 298 of the Penal Code. There's also a 298A for Wilayah Persekutuan. So I am a little bit troubled by these prior restraints. I think there is adequate provision in the Penal Code and in the Constitution and in Sharia law to punish those who insult Islam. Then Aizat, hate speech. What's the practical threshold? Not so easy for me just actually off the cuff to give you the practical threshold. There are lots of cases. But basically the issue is this. You are free to propagate your religion. You are free to praise your religion. But to talk itself in the mosque, you have to go through the authorities. Basically, the requirement of tawliya, the moment you are in the mosque, Prof, they'll say you are trying to propagate. So you'll have to go through the Sharia authorities. Basically what I was talking about hate speech is this. I think you're allowed to propagate your religion, to praise it, to talk about all the wholesome aspects. But the moment you start denigrating others, insulting others, hurting feelings, I think that's where the line should be drawn. So if I were to say in Islam there is a concept of environmentalism because forests, the trees, the rivers, the lakes, owned by me, not owned by the owner of the land, they're owned by God, and I'm just a trustee. I think that's all right. But if I were to start saying, but in such and such religion, it is very hedonistic, then I think the law should look into such matters. I think we have no right to insult other religions. Though what is an insult and what is a fair comment, yes, I think on that, well, try it and see. That's all. Try it and see.
Thank you, Prof. Shad, Saleem, Faruqi. I think I'll call for a round of applause. I think it's a very interesting talk and a very interesting discussion. And during his talk, Prof. Shad Faruqi mentioned about the regression, basically the situation of freedom of religion basically regresses mainly in the 1980s. And one of the reasons I think that we would agree is related to the ignorance of the richness of the Islamic thought, which also Prof. Shad Saleem Faruqi also mentioned. The richness of Islamic thought is something actually is very well rooted in Islam. It has always been, and it will always be. But that is the part which I may have some reservation, whether the richness of Islamic thought will always be, particularly in the case of Malaysia. The richness of Islamic thought in some ways is not being expanding, I would say, in the past few years. And this may be one of the reasons why the situation of religious freedom is not moving towards the positive direction. So to end this, I call for us to review back the Marrakesh Declaration, particularly on the part which it calls for members of the civil society, which it is all of us. We should establish a broad movement that acknowledges the rights to religious freedom to all groups in Muslim societies, mainly in Malaysia. So for us to ensure a better situation of religious freedom, it's supposed to be a continuous and active process which all of us must take part, including talks, including seminars, and also perhaps more other strategic plans and activities that can be done for the future. So I'll end it here, and I'll pass the session to our next moderator, which is Ms. Mariam Zakia. So the next discussion will also be very interesting because it's going to be a discussion on the challenges of religious freedom in Indonesia. So I would pass the session to Mariam.